You're listening to the Kilcullen Diary podcasts, stories in sound from a village grown bigger. Hello, I'm Brian Byrne. This is Kilcullen Diary, and this podcast is in my On This Day series. On this day in 1989, the president of Romania, Nicolae Ceaușescu, was overthrown after more than 2 decades as head of a state widely regarded as a dictatorship. 2 days later, Christmas Day, he and his wife Elena were shot by firing squad after being tried and convicted by a military tribunal. It was an ignominious end to a life which had started as a child in a peasant family with a reportedly very religious ethos. The young Ceaușescu learned tailoring and shoemaking and joined the illegal Communist Party. His activism led to arrests as an agitator, and during World War II he spent time in various prison camps where he earned the dubious role of enforcer for the party's educational activities within prison under their leader Georgiu Day. When the Communists seized power under Georgiu Day in 1947, Ceaușescu was ready for key roles and quickly went up through the ranks until he was appointed to the ruling Politburo in 1954. In 1965, he was elected General Secretary of the party following Georgiu Day's death. 2 years later, he had manipulated his position to become head of state. Unusually for a communist bloc country, Ceaușescu's attitudes were anti-Moscow and open to the West. He led his largely rural economics country into heavy industrialization. He opened trade agreements with the European Economic Community, and he criticized the 1968 invasion of Czechoslovakia by Warsaw Pact forces. He made official visits to Western countries, and in return he received US President Richard Nixon as an official visitor. Under a presentation of reforming communism, he promoted university education throughout the country, training engineers, economists and lawyers. State care for women in pregnancy and child care for those going back to work were seemingly positives. But the regime also restricted abortion and contraception and made divorce more difficult in a program to reverse declining birth rates. This in turn would subsequently lead to the mass abandonment of children and to the become notorious orphanage situation in his country. After a visit to China and North Korea in 1971, Ceaușescu became obsessed by their totalitarian control and complete domination of people and resources to build the power of the state. Back in Romania, he introduced his own variants of what he had seen, with special emphasis on the system of Kim Il-sung in North Korea. This included demolishing villages and moving people into high-density flats as part of a massive rural resettlement program aimed at boosting industrialization. Ceaușescu's regime had received substantial funds from Western countries to promote his alienation from the pro-Soviet Warsaw Pact group. In part, the reason the country became heavily indebted, along with poor borrowing decisions by Ceaușescu. A decision by him to totally eliminate foreign debt during the 1980s to fix this led to economic stagnation and reduction in the standard of living of ordinary people. At the same time, having succumbed to the concept of a personality cult, he wanted to build a grandiose palace in Bucharest. That led to the demolition of a large swathe of the capital's centre. Growing unrest led to spontaneous strikes in parts of the country. There was an abortive attempt to mount a military coup. Finally, a massive strike in the city of Brasov in 1987 promoted draconian repressive measures of cutting food, energy and incomes of the striking workers. Many, convicted of hooliganism, were forcibly deported to other parts of the country. In November 1989, Ceaușescu was re-elected for another 5 years. On the 17th of December in that year, demonstrations in the city of Timișoara, triggered by a government-sponsored attempt to evict an ethnic Hungarian pastor, were fired on by government forces, killing and wounding many. On the 21st of December, at a mass meeting called by Ceaușescu in Bucharest to rally the citizens, he was heckled and booed and soon had to abandon the meeting and retreat into government buildings. By the next day, a rebellion had spread across the country. At another public meeting in Bucharest, Ceaușescu again tried to speak, but once again had to retreat after the crowd began throwing projectiles at him. He and his wife fled the capital by helicopter. This was later ordered to land by the army, which virtually overnight had turned completely to support the rebellion. The Ceaușescus were held by police and eventually handed over to the army. A short trial saw both accused and convicted of crimes that included illegal gathering of wealth and genocide of their own people. Videos of the trial and the subsequent execution were released widely in the West 2 days later. Nicolae Ceaușescu had become yet another in a long line of dictators going back as far as Julius Caesar, and including Hitler and Mussolini, Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi in more recent times, who came to inglorious ends. Fates which, seemingly, don't seem to be lessons to many who are or aspire to be the dictators of today and tomorrow. I'm Brian Byrne. This is Kilcullen Diary. Thank you for listening.